It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Will they, won't they, will they, won't they, will they join the dance? Zelensky, looking like a man in the middle of his 19th nervous breakdown, has changed his mind again. He wasn't going to negotiate with the Russians, and that was only a couple of hours ago. Now he is, under the strong American leadership that he walked out on under a cloud just a few days ago. And the big war leader, Keir Starmer, who was raising the flag of a European revolt against the United States just at the weekend, has now run it down again. Will there be any kind of talks? Will there be any kind of end to the war in Ukraine? And the Arabs have pitched their tent in Gaza and told Donald Trump to back off. They're going to spend $35 billion, they say, rebuilding Gaza without the Palestinians having to move. Trump has already rejected it. We are on these big stories and many others tonight on the mother of all talk shows. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Unlike the King and the Prime Minister, I'm going to mention that today is Ash Wednesday and the beginning of Lent. It is truly extraordinary in the year of our Lord 2025 that with all their social media portals, neither the royal family nor 10 Downing Street have even commented on the beginning of Lent. Although the last time I looked, they were Ramadan Mubaraking everybody in sight, even while they were massacring Palestinian Muslims in Gaza and turning away from the massacre of Muslims in other places in the region. So my daughter got the ash today, and very, very fine she looked for it too. But the big story this evening is that Zelensky has changed his mind again. He's in the grip of a kind of schizophrenia, and he may well have sold the same mineral rights twice to two entirely different partners. It looks as if he signed in the 100-year deal. How absurd and vainglorious is that? A 100-year treaty. I've got it sitting on my desk. I'm looking very carefully at some of the clauses, Keir Starmer. If you imagine that your 100-year treaty is going to silence me, you don't know me at all. But in the 100-year deal, it's clear that Zelensky has sold the mineral rights in the western part of Ukraine, I'll come back to that point in a minute, to Keir Starmer, which presumably explains the largesse being lavished by the British Exchequer on the little coke sniffer. £8 billion sterling has been given by Keir Starmer to Zelensky since Starmer became Prime Minister not even a year ago, not even 9 months ago. 8 billion in 9 months is pretty good going. But then there might have been gold in them there hills, or at least minerals, and Starmer had secured the rights to them, except having refused in the White House to sign a deal giving the same minerals to the United States, having been thrown out of the White House, almost physically ordered off the premises, refusing to sign the mineral agreement, Zelensky has now said in a letter to Donald Trump, which actually is a tweet. The postal services are so last century. I mean, snail mail, forget it. Send a tweet between one president and the other, totally capitulating and saying that you're coming back, you want to come back, having said that you will never go back, having been told by President Trump you'll never be allowed back. Now he wants back in the White House. But he wants Macron and Starmer to go with him. Maybe like, a couple who've adopted him, his guardians. Macron and a man, I know it's hard to believe, but Starmer and Macron were ready to go, or at least until this afternoon when Macron denied that he was going to go. So it looks like only Starmer wants to accompany little Zelensky back to the White House, where he will sign over the exact same minerals he's already sold to the British to the United States of America. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has scrapped the intelligence sharing agreement that he had with Ukraine. The United States has 8,000 plus satellites orbiting the battlefield right now. Most of them, incidentally, owned by Elon Musk, a member of Donald Trump's government. And those satellites are now switched off for Ukraine, which means Ukraine has no idea of Russian troop movements, whether the Russians are moving up somewhere or not. You cannot fight a war without that kind of intelligence, and Zelensky now doesn't have it. Neither does he have any more American weapons, which have been halted at the depots in which they were being stored, ready to be shipped in. The Germans have declared that they have no more weapons left to give to Ukraine. If Vladimir Putin's thinking of restaging Berlin 1945, this would appear to be a good time to do it, as the Germans have run out of ammunition. The Poles have made it clear that they will not be sending any forces to the Ukraine. The Italians, having agreed at the weekend to do so, have now declared that they are retreating. Who would have thunk it? An Italian government, an Italian army leaving the field so soon. So it's us and the French. Except it's not even us and the French. Those of you who know anything about French military prowess since the Napoleonic era know that the French army, well, to put it kindly, cannot be relied upon. And the lads that had to be lifted off the beach at Dunkirk and their sons and daughters could tell you more about that. So it looks like it's only us. except there's only 74,000 of us. That's the entire strength of the British Army, of which only half are frontline soldiers. The rest are hairdressers and auxiliaries and ambulance personnel and firefighters and clerks and typists. So we're down to a very small number of forces indeed, which is why I raised the hue and cry in the last few days over the imminence of conscription being returned to the United Kingdom. It could not be otherwise, because Starmer said he was going to send 30,000 British soldiers to act as so-called peacekeepers in the western part, presumably, of Ukraine, except that would leave us with fewer than 15,000 soldiers left in the entire country, in the entire world. They'd have to take the guards of Buckingham Palace and the Palace of Westminster in order to make a deployment of that size. And so it is axiomatic that any madcap foreign adventure expeditionary force like Starmer announced at the weekend he was going to form would require your sons and daughters to be conscripted to perchance die for Keir Starmer in a charge of the Light Brigade. And so last evening, my party, the Workers' Party of Britain, launched No to Conscription. It's a league. It's a broadly based coalition of all right-thinking people and organisations, and I invite you to go to the Workers' Party of Britain portals and sign up and join the League. The League is the real issue here. I was asked on RT this afternoon. I don't know if I was committing any kind of offence. I wasn't paid for it, so I doubt if I was. But I made the point to RT this afternoon that it's Britain's simple refusal, a bit like Manchester United, to recognise that we are no longer a top team, that we are no longer the champions, that we are no longer even a top four, or even a top six, or in the case of Manchester United, even a top half of the table team. That's what Britain is. And it's British governments, successive British governments, refusal to acknowledge that overwhelming truth that is the source of all our troubles. That 8 billion I just told you about, that we have already given Zelensky and have pledged to give him for 100 years, long after everyone doing the pledging is dead, even after their children are long dead. We're going to be giving the Ukrainian state £4 billion a year. But the cost of taking away the cold weather payments for our mothers and fathers, grandfathers and grandmothers in a bitter British winter was half of 4 billion, 2 billion. So we made a conscious decision to freeze our old age pensioners, to give it to Zelensky to set fire to as many others as he possibly could. And if you think that the British public will put up with that in perpetuity, you have a lower opinion of the British public than I do. I predict the 100-year treaty will not survive the end of this Parliament. And in any case, no Parliament can bind its successor, and the successor Parliament ought to trash the whole thing, put it in the dustbin of history. Anybody who thinks in terms of 100 years or 1,000 years, anyone who thinks in terms of building a new Reich or a new empire in Europe, fading, failing, flailing Europe, is really lost the place. They are one flew over the cuckoo's nest. But it is remarkable, the kind of things that are happening. The Hungarian government, a member of the European Union, has just had its voting rights taken away from it by the European Parliament because it had the temerity to seek to block yet another massive tranche of billions of euros going from the European Union to Zelensky and Ukraine. And as I've raised this before with you. Exactly what is this money supposed to be spent on? The American armory and depots are lost to it now. The British military-industrial complex, the German, the Polish, the French simply are unable to produce more weapons of war. So what are we giving this money for? It's hard to avoid the temptation that it is a money laundering scheme and that the kickbacks from it will be considerable. We already know the extent of the kickbacks that are going to Ukrainian politicians and officials, even low-level officials. One low-level civil servant in the Ukrainian Department of Defense was arrested less than a week ago with $14 million in cash. And that's before you even calculate the sell-on prices of weapons that have been delivered that are now turning up everywhere from Africa to the Mexican drug cartels. This is a gigantic scam. You know, Madoff went to jail, not for as long as he should have. But this is a Ponzi scheme. This is a scam bigger than any that humanity has ever experienced before. And it looks like Trump and Musk are determined to bring it to an end. But, as they're fond of saying in relation to China, at what cost? Are they going to simply redeploy all this material, all this money towards other theaters of potential conflict or actual conflict? Why are these B-52s on the base, the tarmac of the base, biggest American base in the world, in Qatar? Are they going to attack Iran? Are they intending a war with China? China said today, in relation to a very ill-judged, if I may say so, trade war, the first shots of which were fired by Trump yesterday against China. Putting tariffs on China is a very bad idea. First of all, because China is well placed to tariff you. And China owns more US dollars than the US Treasury itself owns. China owns enough US Treasury bills and bonds to sink the United States economy simply by dumping them on the international market. Now, China presently has no plans to do anything about that hegemony, shall I call it, not least because they like money in China and they don't want to lose it by selling at 20 cents or 50 cents off the dollar. But they could, and any kind of trade war with China will end with America as the loser. America's declaring trade wars everywhere. The United States and Canada are in the middle of a trade war. Trump said last night before the Congress that he was going to have Greenland, to quote him, one way or another. I remind you that the United States and Denmark are NATO allies. The Danish Prime Minister, meanwhile, can speak about nothing except Russia, 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 while America is openly threatening to take your sovereign territory. Now, I don't give a toss, not a toss, about Greenland. For that matter, not a toss about Denmark or Canada. Frankly, they all deserve each other. Canada, which has been a supine, arse-kissing, crawling ally of the United States for so long, I can scarcely remember the days when Canada was a nice word in the world. And so if Trump is now turning on them, good luck to them. Don't come asking the Crown to send nuclear weapons to defend you. Oh, wait. Chrystia Freeland, who's running to be the next Prime Minister of Canada to succeed Trudeau, thought he'd resigned, by the way, Like a bad penny, turns up every day, months after he declared his resignation. But Friedland said yesterday that in a conflict with Trump, British nuclear weapons would protect Canada. This is what I mean about one flew over the cuckoo's nest. She's imagining that Britain, with its nuclear weapons, will defend Canada against the United States of America. But there's another problem with that. Britain doesn't have any independent nuclear weapons. British use of nuclear weapons has to be agreed with the United States. And the United States, by flicking a switch, could make it impossible for us to use them. So Friedland thinks that we're going to defend Canada against the United States with nuclear weapons which are under the control of the United States. How did it come to pass that the world was ruled by raving, blithering idiots, as it appears now to be? The Arab League, who knew the Arabs had a league? I mean, this is really third division, maybe fourth division league. But the Arabs have got a peace plan for Gaza, sponsored by Egypt. A massive spend to rebuild Gaza without moving the Palestinian people out. Well, Trump has already rejected it. So let's see what happens next. But a more important, urgent, and immediate question is that Israel has just switched off the water, the food, the medicine, all the necessary means of life from Gaza again, in defiance of the peace agreement, the ceasefire agreement, which they themselves signed. They signed a deal in which prisoners would be exchanged on a mutual basis each week, and that 100 trucks a day of urgently needed humanitarian aid would be allowed into the Gaza Strip, and that Israel would vacate the Philadelphia corridor, which is where the gate between Egypt and Gaza is, so that they could not stop this aid coming in again. They have just unilaterally binned it. They're no longer going to be bound by it. And people, refugees, women, and children are being murdered in Gaza all over again. Oh, give it up for Lent, why don't you? I'll be right back with the first guest of the evening after this short break. Stay tuned. I don't believe that the mainland European countries give a toss about Britain, and I'm certain that the United States would not sacrifice itself for Britain. That's why I say Britain is completely marginalized. As for the Trident missiles, of course, if the United States, which has dual control over these missiles, gave permission for them to be launched, of course, they would incinerate Russian cities. But what good would that do us? Because we'd all be dead, including the people that fired the missiles. You feel me?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Here's the poll for this evening. Do you support conscription for Ukraine? Simple question, yes or no. You can answer on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, please make sure you have subscribed to my channel and give a thumbs up to the show. It helps us beat Mr. Algorithm. So far, 30,000 people have voted, and I've just announced it. And, well, you want to have your say. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the United States and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the United Kingdom and Ireland, 08081 965522. And the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Our first guest this evening is a good friend of the show. Dan Cohen is a journalist at Uncaptured News and a celebrated filmmaker. Dan, thanks for joining us this evening. Can I start with Gaza? The situation will quickly become absolutely critical again, now that there's no food, no water, no power, no medicine, no hospitals standing, and Israel has slammed shut the gates and begun killing people again. Will the Arab plan stop that?
Well, if the Arab plan were implemented, which seems to be reasonable on its face, then presumably so. But the main issue, I don't think, is whether the Arab plan itself is viable, but rather that there's no point in rebuilding Gaza if Israel is simply going to destroy it again. We've seen the same thing after the 2014 war, for example, which I chronicled in the documentary Killing Gaza. And there was a plan to rebuild Gaza, much of which did not materialize, and Israel destroyed Gaza again, and in the last year and a half has reduced it to a pile of rubble. So this is the real impediment to any kind of positive, hopeful outcome in the Gaza Strip.
Well, that's one caveat. The other is that Donald Trump has already rejected it. What do the Arab kings and presidents and generals, what do they do next?
I don't think they really have much of a play. I mean, they've offered up a proposal that, as you correctly said, Donald Trump has rejected essentially on behalf of Israel, which he appears to be taking Israel's side completely on this. And there are no good answers for this completely intolerable situation of permanent siege, permanent occupation, constant bombing, starvation of the Gaza Strip, other than an actual negotiated outcome in which the siege is lifted. The principal demands that Hamas laid out right after, I mean, even previous to October 7th, that it has consistently laid out, that Gaza needs to be free. It needs to be able to live. It needs to be able to rebuild, and it needs a guarantee of a ceasefire without Israel coming to destroy it, commit mass murder, and reduce it to rubble once again. And unless that is the core of the agreement, then it's essentially pointless.
But what about all these countries, including yours and mine? Virtually every country in the world has signed documents without number and made statements without number that they support the two-state solution, with the Palestinian state being in the West Bank and Gaza, and East Jerusalem in some countries' cases, not others. How can these governments stand by and watch the wholesale slaughter of the people in the Gaza Strip and the determination to empty the Gaza Strip and turn it into Trump Towers, with a hotel and a bordello and a casino and luxury apartments? That contradiction is so glaring, it's little wonder that none of the journalists and none of the politicians in these countries even talks about it.
Well, it just shows the complete moral bankruptcy of the Western governments, not only the Western governments of the US, the UK, the European allies, but also the regional regimes of Jordan, of Egypt, of the UAE, of Saudi, of Qatar that have basically stood by as this slaughter has unfolded and have sought to normalize with Israel. And that was certainly the plan prior to October 7th with the Abraham Accords. And they basically see October 7th and the genocide that has followed as a roadblock to that. And so they want this to basically stop so they can normalize with Israel. So these are corrupt regimes that have never been elected, and are essentially dictatorships that serve Western interests. There's really nothing positive you can say about them. I think the reason that they are worried by the situation in Gaza is the Israeli demand plan that's been endorsed basically by Trump to ethnically cleanse Gaza, which would destabilize not only Gaza, but also the occupied West Bank, that would destabilize them. Egypt cannot take in millions of Palestinian refugees without being destabilized, and the same for Jordan. So the survival of those regimes depends on this happening. But George, I presume you've seen the latest developments with Trump, the Trump administration holding talks with Hamas.
I did. Israel's furious about it.
Yes, I mean, to me, it's potentially a watershed moment. I mean, this is unprecedented that a U.S. administration is holding talks with Hamas, who they have, of course, the U.S. has sided with Israel and been completely deferential. In particular, the Biden administration was throughout this entire genocide and even going back before. So for the Trump administration to basically circumvent, to sidestep Netanyahu, signals to me that despite the rhetoric from Netanyahu about plans to occupy Gaza, to take Gaza, to turn it into some kind of Mediterranean Riviera, Trump recognizes that the impediment to peace is actually none other than not Hamas, but Benjamin Netanyahu. And Trump does not want a war with Iran. He certainly does not love Iran, but if he knows that if war resumes in the Gaza Strip, then that can easily escalate to a war with Iran, and a real war with Iran would completely wipe out the U.S. military presence in the Middle East, as well as particularly in the Gulf countries, in Qatar and UAE and Saudi, and would destroy the energy infrastructure, which would collapse the world market, the global economy. And so Trump is obviously not a fool. We can see what's happening with the negotiations with Russia regarding the Ukraine war, and I think he has basically pumped up Netanyahu in a way. But I mean, I've been thinking for months, and I've said this on other shows. I suspect that Trump's policy may be keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And he knows that Netanyahu, well, when he posted the video of Jeffrey Sachs calling calling Netanyahu a deep dark son of a B word. I don't know if I can curse on air, but it's obvious there is daylight between Trump and Netanyahu, and this is very important.
That's a ray of hope. And another is that Russia has begun acting as a kind of mediator between the US and Iran. The Kremlin confirmed today that they had spoken to the United States about the Iran file, and that they would be speaking to Iran about it. That would be a cute solution, wouldn't it? If the new warmer US-Russian relations in turn led to a negotiation where everybody got something, that is the art of the deal after all, on the Iran nuclear file.
Absolutely, that would be a positive outcome. Diplomacy, negotiations are always better than war, than killing, than death, and we've seen so much of that. I think one of the things that we need to watch for going forward, or even one of the questions, is how did Barak Ravid, the Axios correspondent, who is very close with the Israeli intelligence and Israeli government, how did he find out that the Trump administration is negotiating secretly with Hamas? How did he find that out? why was that leaked to him? And so I think there are major questions about what Israel is doing to potentially sabotage any negotiations between the Trump administration and Hamas in order to return to war. But what efforts may there be from Israel to sabotage any other efforts, any other negotiations going forward? So I think, watching what just happened last week with Zelensky's visit to the White House and his attempt to basically to embarrass Donald Trump and the spectacular failure that accomplished, Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government have to be a bit uncomfortable and sweating in their suits as they wonder if Trump is going to force a ceasefire, and what would be the political fallout, a long-term ceasefire, I should say. What would be the long-term fallout in Israel as they basically swallow a bitter pill forced on by their closest ally, the man that they have said is the greatest friend Israel has ever had, Donald Trump.
Especially if there turned out to be I don't know, a Jonathan Pollard somewhere within the State Department or the Department of Defense, who had actually not leaked but spied on the Trump administration and revealed this news to a tame Israeli journalist.
Precisely. That is a strong possibility. We know there is a long history of Israeli spying on U.S. governments and presidential administrations, planting of bugs so they can listen in on sensitive conversations. And if I recall the story exactly, I think there was an Israeli spy one time hiding in a bathroom in the White House who fell out of the ceiling, and I think this was during the Clinton administration, and it was a shocking moment. So, you really have to wonder what methods will the Israeli government and assets it has here in Washington carry out in order to sabotage any kind of possible negotiations to see not only ceasefire, but to see captives released, both American citizens and, of course, Israeli citizens.
Finally, let's talk about Trump. He looked like a man absolutely in command to me last night. Of course, the Democrats are sitting on their hands and acting like churls. The Democratic Party has morphed into the ultra-war party and is busily denouncing Agent I don't know what the name was. They came up with a name, Agent somebody, Karimov or someone like that. They're back on the Russia charge. But Trump really dealt with them all contemptuously, effortlessly. He looked like a man in total command of the American political scene to me last night. Is that how it looks to you? They're moving at warp speed. What do you think of the show so far?
Yeah, I completely agree with your assessment there. Watching the speech Trump gave in the Congress, it was remarkable to see. He chastised the Democratic Party for refusing to applaud for anything he would ever do. And in particular, the most revealing part, I think, was when he spoke about the need for peace between Ukraine and Russia, and the Democrats as the premier war party. Not that the Republicans are so much better, but it is complete ideological uniformity in the Democratic Party. They refuse to cheer for the prospect of ending the Ukraine war, which just says everything. But I thought it was very notable that Trump, he did not spend more than a sentence talking about Israel, Gaza. He mentioned that recently released hostages were in attendance, and he's been his administration has been meeting with them, but there was not talk about he didn't say we're going to take Gaza, any of this bravado that he's been putting out on social media these AI videos, that was all completely absent from his speech, which I thought was very remarkable and telling, frankly. And then the next morning, we find out that actually the Trump administration is holding these secret talks with Hamas. So again, if I were in Netanyahu's government, I would be feeling quite uncomfortable with what's happening right now. But they just have no way. What are they going to denounce Trump? Of course they can't do that. They have, as they said with Zelensky, you don't have the cards. Netanyahu does not have the cards. He's just gotten billions of dollars worth more of missiles and weapons from the U.S. But if he doesn't have guarantees that the U.S. is going to back him, what is he going to use those to break a ceasefire that the U.S. has negotiated without him? So it was a remarkable speech, and I think that's one of the most actually important. What's most important is what he did not say.
Absolutely. Agent Krasnov, he's in command. Thank you, Dan Cohen, journalist at Uncaptured News and prominent, celebrated filmmaker. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Do you support conscription for Ukraine? Yes. 4%, 8%, 6%, and 7%. You notice on Twitter, it's always the biggest vote in favor of the wrong answer. 96, 92, 94, 93. Do you support conscription for Ukraine? Well, the audience overwhelmingly says no at this point, but you can change that. You've still got an hour to cast your vote on Telegram, on X, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. Quick break, then it's your calls right up to the hour. Stay tuned.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As vicious as the Twitter sphere, where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's go to New York, where Dina wants to talk about Trump and Gaza. Dina, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mr. Galloway. How are you? I wanted to talk about...
By the grace of God, good. Nice to hear from you.
You too. I wanted to talk about Trump's plan for Gaza. I think that displaced or not, I'm not advocating his point of view, but I think that he wants to make an economic opportunity for the Palestinian people. I truly believe that. Based on
that would be great as long as they were still there, Dina.
Not in the media or on the podium, like when he was traveling around the country. You know, I don't think he's a Netanyahu fan. I think he thinks he's a buffoon. But he has to, show his support for Israel in the United States.
Well, you might be right, and I myself have said many times that Donald Trump has to be the only bull. He can't allow Netanyahu to stand on his toes too much. I agree with that point, but you can't say that he wants an economic opportunity for the Palestinians in Gaza when at this point his proposal is to remove all the Palestinians from Gaza and not allow them to return. That was his last public position on this. Now, as Dan Cohen just pointed out, it is significant, you know, the dog that did not bark, the shoe that didn't drop. It is significant that he made no reference at all to this in his speech to the Congress last night. So maybe you're right, Dina. Last word to you.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's correct, but I do think that he genuinely believes that making economic opportunities will help the Palestinian people, and that moving them out of there so that they can renovate. But by the time that happens, Trump will be long out of office, and then they could go back and do whatever they want. And then the people will be already.
Well, they couldn't go back because, but they couldn't go back because Netanyahu would not allow them to go back, Dina.
That's what I'm saying. But I do believe that Donald Trump is genuine in what he says, as asinine as it may sound.
Okay, that's a perfectly legitimate point of view, and I'm glad you made it here on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Now, you can leave comments on the YouTube. Scan the QR code now on the corner of your screen, and I'll try and read them out. Julian Morris, 9951, says the British Army should be protecting our borders from illegal immigration, not pointlessly dying in Ukraine in a war that cannot be won. Well said, Julian. Tiger V8Z says boots on the ground. After you, Sir Keir. And Moran's Lad says, not since Napoleon's defeat have the French fought or won any war. And Lisa Barnett says, no way my sons are fighting a politician's wars. 3.2 million people saw and interacted with my tweet just the other day, not even 2 days ago, not more than 2 days ago, in which I stated that my one military-aged child, my eldest son, will be removed from the country by me before I'll let Keir Starmer get his dirty hands on him. And a lot of people agree with that. That's why I've launched this No Conscription League. It'll have its own Twitter handle soon, but you can get more details at Workers' Party of Britain. Falcon Heavy says Ukraine already got its Balfour Declaration 2.0 written up by Britain. The US will ultimately be dragged into this, just like how the illegal terrorist state of Israel was founded. Let's go to England, where Zaid is in Watford, but wants to talk about Ukraine. Go ahead, Zaid.
Good evening, George, and thank you for taking my call. First, before Ukraine, regarding Gaza, I think it's blatantly clear to all us Arabs, including the Arab League, that Israel is not interested in a two-state solution. Israel is only interested in a final solution, the complete eradication of Palestine and the Palestinian people. So the proposal from the Arab League is just a face-saving exercise, and they know the inevitable is coming. Now, regarding Ukraine, you've been very consistent throughout your career regarding your support for Palestine, and we're really grateful for that. But with Ukraine, I'm confused by your stance, especially after the Piers Morgan interview, because you clearly are not on Zelensky's side, you don't like him, but he also said on Piers Morgan that you don't like Trump, and you don't obviously like Starmer either, and I can't believe for 1 minute that a man of your integrity is with Vladimir Putin. And So I'm confused by your stance on this, and I really, be grateful if you can clarify that. Because what
I'm confused that you're confused. What is confusing about someone like me being entirely opposed to a US-EU sponsored coup d'etat which overthrew the president of Ukraine and immediately declared the Russian language spoken by a third of all Ukrainians, including Zelensky himself, as not legal, to be scrubbed off every school book, of every legal document, not to be allowed to be spoken on television or radio. What is confusing about me being opposed to almost a decade of mass murder of Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the east of the country, in the Donetsk and Donbass areas? 14,000, mainly women and children, were massacred by the new regime in Kiev with Western support. What's confusing about me being opposed to NATO parking its weapons, its bases, its biolabs next door to Russia? What is confusing about my holistic, lifelong opposition to imperialism? The reality is that US imperialism has always been determined to weaken and, if possible, to break Russia. Long before there was anybody called Putin had crossed your consciousness. What's confusing to me is that a man like you, a regular caller here, a supporter of the opposition to that very same empire in Palestine, that you should be confused about my point of view. What's confusing is how someone like you could make the call that you just made. Now, a big thanks to this week's top donors who visited the new MOATS.tv website: Robert Turley, Dana Turner, Mary Moriarty, Kalia Vap, Hugh Williams, and Abdul Kader Moyes. I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for that generosity that you have shown in the past week on MOATS.tv, which is our new website. Try, please, and visit it. And when you visit it, make a donation. Make a donation, whether it is £1, €1, $1, preferably more, as much as you can afford to keep the mother of all talk shows on the air. You can do it through our website, moats.tv. Now, let's go to Canada. Lance is in Canada. He's always worth hearing. Go ahead, Lance.
Well, I wasn't originally going to talk about Gaza, but I mean, the reality is that they are building 5,000, an embassy in, well, let's call it a rendition site in, Lebanon to house 5,000 employees. And the strategic Hamlet program has been put out there for Gaza. So, I mean, I don't know if that's going to be tried again. But I don't know. I think it's a tough go for those Palestinians. I guess my question to you would be, you have connections in the Middle East. So, I mean, I was just watching YouTube the other day, and a Saudi influencer came on and talked about why, the Jews are native to Israel and why they should have the land and stuff like that. And he was a Saudi. So, is there a massive propaganda campaign in the Middle East to promote this, the homeland thing and, kind of defile Palestinians in the public space?
Well, look, Lance, A religion cannot be native to any land. There are Chinese Jews. I've met them. There are Vietnamese Jews. I've met them. They're not native to the land of Palestine. There are African Jews. They're not native to the land of Palestine either. There are Ashkenazi Jews who are entirely European in their DNA. That's why you're not allowed to have a DNA test in Israel, because it will reveal that virtually none of them are Semitic, virtually none of them have any ancestral connection to the land. As a Roman Catholic, I have no right at all to the land of any other Roman Catholic anywhere in the world. Even to state that proposition demonstrates its complete absurdity. You can convert to Judaism. I'm wearing a hat. The reason I'm wearing a hat is because I was viciously assaulted. I was viciously assaulted by a manager in the BBC who had recently converted to Judaism. Now, it's fine. I love all religions. But you can't say I've now converted to Judaism and therefore I have a right to go to the land of Palestine and live in the house of someone whose ancestors have been living in it for thousands of years. Again, merely to state that truth is to demonstrate the absurdity of the propaganda to which you allude, to which you refer. The Jews that lived in Palestine always lived in Palestine in perfect amity with the Muslims and Christians who also had lived there for millennia. That's a matter of historical fact. Moreover, the Jews that lived in the Arab lands, why were they living in the Arab lands of Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt? Why were they living there? Because the European Christian restoration, beginning with Isabella in Spain, kicked all the Jews out of their European land. And where did they go for safety? They went to North Africa. Even as far as Iraq and Iran they went, fleeing from Christian anti-Semitism. Do you know that the biggest community of Jews in the Middle East outside of Israel is where? It's in the Islamic Republic of Iran, where again they live lives of perfect amity with their Muslim and minority Christian Iranian neighbors. So I don't buy this blood and soil business, you know, especially when you have no connection with your blood to that soil. Let's refer, if I may, to the podcast. Sunday's episode of our podcast was the most listened to Sunday episode this year so far. In the top 20 in Russia again, the top 10 in Lithuania, in Egypt, Malaysia, and Italy. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. But of course, you can also listen to the weekly podcast via the website, moats.tv. Let's go to Raymond in Scotland on Zionism. Go ahead, Raymond.
Hey, George, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Basically, right, I think, see, when all the noise is kind of set aside, it seems pretty clear that the end game in Israel is to wipe Gaza off the map and then possibly the West Bank after that. And given that, I don't know if you agree with that, that's my reading of the situation, that regardless of what they say, that is what the end game is. And regarding AIPAC in the US, how does Trump square that circle, given that they are the largest lobby in the US?
Well, he's very definitely swayed by them, and you could argue in the last election was partially bought by them. But the thing about the words last election is that it's in the past tense. The last election is over. Trump doesn't have to stand in any further elections. And there's nothing as an ex-donor, as a donor whose donation has already been spent. So I agree kind of with Dina in New York. I wouldn't think that Netanyahu has got Donald Trump by the balls in the way that he had previous presidents by the balls. And the fact that they gave $100 million from one person alone, Miriam Adelson, and no doubt much more from other supporters of Israel, isn't necessarily a guarantee that Trump will always fall on the same side as them. I stick by my view that I've stated for years that Trump doesn't like Netanyahu. He doesn't like characters like Netanyahu. And I agree with Dan Cohen that Netanyahu cannot be sure that Donald Trump will not one day do to him what he did to little Zelensky in the Oval Office last week. Now, you say the end game. It's only the end game if it happens. And I don't believe that it will happen. If by that you really mean that's what they want to do, then of course you're right. They want to clear every last Palestinian from Palestinian soil, but they're not able to achieve that. They're not able to defeat even Gaza, never mind the West Bank and Gaza. And the amount of force that would be required to literally annihilate the Palestinian population there does not exist. Israel does not possess that kind of force, that kind of strength. That would require United States assistance, and even then, that would be extremely difficult to do. There are more than 4 million Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, closer to 5 million, actually. It's not easy to kill 5 million people when the world is watching. So I don't believe that that's the end game in the sense that that's what's going to happen. But do I believe that they would like it to be? Absolutely. Do I believe that they will try to make it happen? Absolutely. I agree with that. Thanks, Raymond. Do you support conscription for Ukraine? Yes or no? The Telegram channel has 921 votes cast. 96% of them said no, they don't support conscription for Ukraine. On X, 6,051 people have voted. 92% of those say no. The YouTube community poll, 21,000 have voted. 94% of them say no. Now, and on the YouTube stream, 3,594 have voted. 93% say no. So with that level of support for conscription, Keir Starmer has a real problem on his hands. He can't do what he wants to do without conscription, and he now knows that conscription is an exceedingly unpopular policy, which we will mobilize against. I'll move my own military-age son out of the country. Not everyone can do that. But we will organize mass civil disobedience, peaceful civil disobedience, against any attempt to conscript any of our young men or women. We'll organize rat lines, we'll organize escapes, we'll organize safe houses. We will do everything in our power to wreck Keir Starmer's attempt to introduce conscription. And it looks like the vast majority of you will be with me. Coming up after the break is the celebrated journalist, speaker, and political analyst, the one and only Caleb Maupin. You don't want to miss him. Stay tuned.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate. Great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
You've still got 45 minutes to vote. Do you support conscription for Ukraine? Yes or no? Please, let's make this a mega poll. Caleb Maupin, journalist, speaker, political analyst, and an all-round wise guy. Caleb, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. You saw it all last night. I was impressed by Trump, got to tell you. His command of the situation, his levels of confidence, and his complete domination of the American political scene right now. Is that how you saw it?
Absolutely. I mean, Donald Trump handled the audience amazingly well. That level of opposition that he faced, where you had Alan Green, the U.S. member of Congress from Texas, waving his cane. They had to stop the speech so he could be escorted out. I mean, you have to look on at this and shake your head. George W. Bush invaded Iraq, lied about weapons of mass destruction. The invasion of Iraq led to the death of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, thousands of U.S. soldiers. And when he spoke before Congress with his State of the Union speeches, Democrats stood up for him every time they gave him standing ovations. But Donald Trump, who's taken office once again and might, God forbid, want to end the war in Ukraine, was met with cold silence and disruptions. The Democratic Party is really bankrupt, and Donald Trump used this speech to just steamroll right over them. He even used their catchphrase. He said one of his goals was to provide, quote, immediate relief to working families. Now, that phrase, working families, that was a phrase that was popularized by the labor movement in the United States during the 1990s. Polling showed that in the United States, the phrase working class doesn't really go over. Americans tend to always say they're middle class. And the word working class, people think of communism or it's vulgar or something like that. But the labor unions discovered in the 1990s that if they talked about working families, that people responded very positively. They think of families working hard, struggling to pay their bills, a hardworking father providing for his kids, etc. And so, the labor unions here in New York State, they started the Working Families Party, which is the second ballot line for the Democrats, etc. And working families was a Democrat Party phrase until recently, because now the wokeification of the Democratic Party has decided that the phrase working families is somehow anti-LGBT. And I don't understand how that works. As far as I'm concerned, LGBT people have families. So I don't know where they're getting this from, but the Democrats are no longer talking about working families. So Donald Trump usurped one of their key phrases. This was an epic victory for Trump. I will say I have my concerns about some of what he said, but as far as a political victory, it was a knockout in one round.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at this as professional observers and analysts, not commenting on the values that lay behind the speech or even the specifics of the speech. But as a matter of political theatre and the kinetics of political power, what you and I are both agreeing on simply cannot be denied, that Trump is the man in charge.
Indeed, he is in charge. I will say my concern, I'm very happy to see the FBI, shut down and stop violating the rights of Americans and be restricted in their repressive activities and their meddling in U.S. politics. I'm very happy to see USAID and its soft power schemes cut off. I'm happy with a lot of what Trump is doing in terms of, limiting the power of the intelligence agencies and the deep state, et cetera. But I am concerned about the loss of jobs on the part of federal employees, because those are good paying jobs, jobs with binding arbitration unions, jobs that, pay sometimes six figures. And that's going to be not in the economy anymore. D.C. is already feeling the results. And while I don't agree with the agenda of the Democratic Party, which was cut and drive down living standards and, trying to degrow the U.S. economy in the name of climate change, letting the power grid crumble, etc., you can't cut your way into economic growth. And if you just reduce government spending, and if you just reduce government jobs, you get rid of the Department of Education, you get rid of thousands of good-paying jobs in the public sector, where's the spending power going to come from? That's money that comes out of the U.S. economy. And that while I am certainly enthusiastic about repudiating a lot of what Biden has done, Bidenomics and the inflation, I am concerned about what the long-term result will be of getting rid of a lot of good-paying government jobs. You can't cut your way into economic growth. This Austrian school, Chicago school, Milton Friedman, flim-flam economics, the foundation of economy is working families, is people being able to spend their money. And Donald Trump was right when he talked about the power grid. We need strong power plants. We need to restore the power grid of the United States. A lot of that was great, but you can't cut your way into economic growth. Austerity does not work as a solution for economics.
Well, of course, as an American citizen, you're right to have every concern on these matters. For us, not Americans, we're more interested in Trump's foreign policy. As far as we're concerned, he can do what he can do within the boundaries of the United States, a matter for you and your people. But when he said, one way or another, we are going to have Greenland, a huge territory which belongs to a NATO ally, Denmark, which has been a slavish ally of the United States. Well, as Oscar Wilde said on the death scene in Little Nell, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to laugh. I laugh when I see Trump and the Canadians, Trump and the Danes at each other's throats, knocking lumps out of each other, because for me it says the empire is falling apart. How does that look to you?
Well, I think when it really gets down to it, we have to understand that Trump's election was a repudiation of the Atlanticist wing of American politics. The old money rooted in New England that is tied in with Britain, and you talk about the Rhodes Scholar Program, the Round Table Group, the Atlantic Council, the Council on Foreign Relations. The Atlanticist wing of American politics, the pro-NATO globalists, they got repudiated. And that's why Donald Trump is happy to inflame them with talk of NATO and talk of Canada. And also, this is the potential for the USA to pivot to the East. And there's been talk for a long time of a bridge connecting Alaska to the Russian Far East over the Bering Sea, and Trump wanting to restore relations with Russia with the ongoing talks in Istanbul. And that I think that there is a big section of the American elite that is with Trump and doesn't think the economic future of the United States lies with the NATO countries and with the former colonial powers. And it would be better for the United States to make a deal with the rising Eurasian economy and the Belt and Road and the new world that's rising in the East than to try to just go down with the so-called collective West. Now, honestly, I think we can look into the pages of history. When it looked like Italy was going to leave NATO in the 1950s with the rise of the Communist Party, there was a wave of instability and unrest in Italy called the Years of Lead. And we now know that was the result of the CIA's Operation Gladio. And British and American intelligence fomented the Years of Lead in Italy, political instability and unrest that led to Italy remaining in NATO, despite the wishes of the Italian public. And I believe that right now, when we see the romanticization of Luigi Mangione and his alleged killing of Brian Thompson, and the kind of romanticization of political violence in the United States, that's what the pro-NATO wing of the establishment is trying to do. They're trying to foment some kind of American years of lead, political instability and confusion to restore the pro-NATO aspects of the American establishment. I think Donald Trump's not some kind of heroic anti-imperialist or something. He's just more concerned with the domestic U.S. economy, and he represents a layer of American business that is not as tied in with globalism and the World Bank and the World Economic Forum, etc. And that there is a division among our elite, and that Donald Trump is very similar to the new right in all of Europe, whether it's Brexit in Britain or the National Front in France or the AfD in Germany. There are divisions because the globalist outlook and the Western financial order is crumbling, and that's what's underlying all of these divisions and tensions.
Let's turn to the big enchilada, Caleb, the rapprochement with Russia, talks in Istanbul, following on the talks in Riyadh, restoration of diplomatic relations, hotlines reestablished, back on, plans for more talks, plans for summit meetings, even a plan to perhaps reopen the Nord Stream pipeline as a partnership between Russia and the United States, though the German Chancellor has just said he'll do everything he can to stop that. Quite amazing, really. The thorn in the eye, or the potential bone in the throat of all of this is Zelensky. He seems to me in a kind of schizophrenic stance. I mean, I looked at my phone there to see if it had changed in the last hour, because an hour ago broke the news that he was, after all, prepared to negotiate with Russia. Seems like an hourly oscillation that's going on. What's really happening, do you think?
Well, I was outside the White House while Zelensky was inside, and I saw with my own eyes how politically bankrupt Zelensky is, because Ukrainian television was outside the White House as well, and they had less than 10 people there, but they were gathering them all around the camera to make it look like their reporter was in a crowd of thousands of people. It was the most disgusting display of propaganda staging that I've ever seen. Meanwhile, there was a local D.C. man who was confronting them and saying, why don't we give the teachers a raise? Why all this money for Ukraine? And, the mainstream media that doesn't like Trump and wants to continue the Ukraine war, they've been showing these demonstrations of Ukrainians in the United States. And you have to ask yourself, it's worth pointing out, all of those Ukrainian young men that are at those demonstrations, they're all draft dodgers. Why would they be in the United States and not on the front lines in Ukraine if they're in the United States? If these guys are so enthusiastic for their country and they just want to continue the war, why are they here avoiding military service as every last Ukrainian man is being dragged off the streets? So Zelensky doesn't want an election because he would lose, because he ran for office on a peace platform and delivered the opposite. Zelensky is bankrupt. Trump's base is laughing at the political smackdown he received inside the White House. So I think that it is only a matter of time before a deal is signed. I will say I'm anxious to see it happen. I really like a lot of what I'm hearing, but it ain't over till it's over, as they say. And the Ukrainiacs, that's what I call them, the Ukrainiacs, the one of them tried to kill Donald Trump, you'll recall, during the election, an individual, an American who'd fought in Ukraine, called himself Ryan Roth or whatever, and he tried to kill Donald Trump. And the Ukrainiacs are fanatical, and they're bloodthirsty, and they are determined to keep this war going. So my concern is I want to see this war brought to an end, and I want to see it end as fast as we can. And words are nice, but we need to see some action. You can't judge Donald Trump, any politician really, but especially Trump. You can't judge him by what they say. You have to judge him by what they do. So when this war is over, when a peace treaty is signed, when U.S.-Russia relations are back at a normal, healthy place as they should be, I will feel much better, and so will the majority of the American people. Public opinion has never been in favor of a military adventure and investing America's hopes and dreams into the Ukrainian battlefields. That has never been where the American people are at.
Now, J.D. Vance, who, quite impressive, I think, he's talking a lot about freedom of expression, freedom of speech. It contradicts what they're doing in the American universities on Palestine, of course. But he seems to be sincere, if you can park that issue. So when can we see RT, Radio Sputnik, back on the air in the United States? Is there any possibility of that?
Well, we could only hope. Sanctions are the issue there. Certain sanctions were placed on RT, and those sanctions would have to be lifted. And, rumors go around about those sanctions being lifted and such, but, I can't confirm anything. I just hear rumors, just like anybody else, but I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that RT and Sputnik are back functioning at full capacity in the United States. That would certainly be a victory, because there's all kinds of foreign media in the United States. So why should Russia be excluded? Why doesn't Russia have the right to do it just like any other country? Obviously we're hoping that should change. J.D. Vance's words are very biting, because this is the old dog chasing its tail. Well, we have to get rid of our freedom because there's these bad people out there that want to take away our freedom. So we have to take away our freedom to make sure the bad people don't, get enough influence and popularity that they'll take our freedom away. This is the old Cold War argument. It's very silly, and J.D. Vance sees through it and has called it out very effectively. If we're truly for Western liberal democratic values, we should let people speak even if we disagree with them.
Caleb Maupin, always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let's take a break, and then it's your calls all the way up to Gayatri's social media roundup. Stay tuned.
There's a group of people in Twitter who are daily posting discussions about Gaza, Lebanon, what's happening, news updates, aid for Gaza, and trying to enlist the help of Jordan and France and any other regional entity that will help get more aid into Gaza and all of Gaza, all of Palestine, for everyone who suffers. So I want to request that everyone who is listening to this go to your local council meetings and peacefully request that their representatives at the local levels do this, because it works.
Thanks for the call, Pia, in Uruguay. I'm a free man of the city of San Francisco, awarded to me for my work on Palestine, on the steps of City Hall itself. So it was a particular delight for me that the San Francisco Council voted by 8 votes to 3 to demand a ceasefire. And that decision didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of campaigning to force the local authority representatives to vote.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
$32,368 votes cast. Do you support conscription for Ukraine? Yes or no? Please vote if you haven't, because I want to be able to brandish the number of people that have voted here and the balance between them. Let's go to the lines. England, Bolton, Idris wants to talk about Russia and the US. Go ahead, Idris.
Hiya, George. Can you hear me? Reception is not very good here.
Very clear. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna read something out. I just wanted some clarity on Russia's position when it comes to the USA. And I'm just going to read. I think it's a news article. I'm just going to read this paragraph out to you. It says, "The Kremlin on Sunday cheered the shift in U.S. foreign policy under Donald Trump, saying that the American view now largely coincides with Russia's take on geopolitics." What do you think that means? Because we all know what the Americans want. They want to take over Greenland. They want Canada. They want Gaza. What's Russia's view on that? It's just clarity. I think it follows on from the previous caller. So I'll just have to some clarity.
Well, you'd need to ask them. Idris. I don't know what's meant by that. And you said Kremlin. You seem to be reporting a third-hand comment by a reporter referring to a Kremlin source. I never believe these kind of things, and neither do I believe that Russia's foreign policy is square with the foreign policy of the United States on the subjects that you mentioned, and many, many, many more. If you mean that the Russians are pleased that they've got a president in Washington who wants to make peace with them, wants to restore diplomatic relations with them, wants to reopen embassies and consular buildings, re-establish the hotlines, and thereby avoid World War III, and no doubt they were cheering. So was I cheering. Weren't you, Idris?
I mean, complete agreement with you, George. I mean, I'm hoping Russia is a voice for the voiceless. I mean, I don't see the Americans or the West helping. I mean, certainly when it comes to the Middle East, they're trying to pick and choose whatever's best for them, and they're not necessarily. The West doesn't appear to be in favour of peace. Now, I don't want. I mean, I'm trying to believe that the Russians are not as imperialistic as the Americans or the West are, and that particular statement.
I think if you look at the issues around the world, you'll find Russia on the same side as you on all of them, whether it's the bombing of Lebanon, the siege of Gaza, the attempted ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, whether it's on the danger of U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran, whether it's in the Sudan, whether it's on any number of global issues, you'll find that Russia's on the same side as you. But I hate to say this, I know you know it, but Russia is not the Soviet Union. Russia is not the USSR. Russia is not a socialist country. It's not a communist country. It is not a country that is in a camp hostile to the Western imperialist camp. In fact, the imperialists have been utterly stupid in pushing Russia away from themselves constantly for well over 25 years, 30 years in fact, since the first stirrings in Moscow about wanting a close relationship with the West became obvious. Yeltsin and then Putin wanted to join the European Union. Putin wanted to join NATO. It's only with the dawning realization that the refusal to let them in the EU, refusal to let them in NATO, was to be accompanied by an ever advancing front coming in their direction as the NATO expanded eastwards in flat defiance of the promises that were made to Gorbachev about the reunification of Germany. Once it became obvious to Russia that the West did not want them, and after Putin's speech in Munich, now more than 15 years ago, in which he laid out Russia's red lines and said, please do not cross these lines. Do not put us to the test on these things. And they ignored him, and they kept on advancing. And Ukraine and the NATO drive in Ukraine was the last straw for Russia. So Russia and China are now indissoluble allies, and that is having its impact in various global conflicts. Not enough of an impact, in my opinion. If I've said this before, Idris, if Russia and China together had said, we are landing hospital ships in the bay in Gaza, and we will take the dead and dying and wounded on board and seek to help them, then Netanyahu could have done nothing about that. Biden could have done nothing about that. They should have done that, but they didn't do it. So I'm not here as a supporter of the entire foreign policy of the Russian Federation, but I'd certainly prefer Putin to Biden, wouldn't you?
I do. We here have been made to believe that we're under threat from the Russians, and I don't see the Russians certainly posing a threat to the Palestinians, whereas the Americans do, and even the Brits.
Sure.
So it's a shame if the Russians are now aligning themselves with the Americans, particularly when.
Well, they're definitely not doing that, Idris. They're definitely not doing that. Putin has repeatedly rejected the American plan for Gaza, and has this evening given his support to the Arab plan of redeveloping Gaza with the Palestinians still there. So I don't think you should worry about that. Idris and Bolton, thank you for that. A big shout out to tonight's top donors who've been on to the MOATS.tv website since we came on the air. Ali Drummond, Graham Welch, Alicia Johnson, Baha Mekald, and Jorge Vidal. A big thanks to each and every one of you. Please, everybody, at the end of the show tonight, go to moats.tv and leave £1, €1, or $1. We need it, and we deserve it. Brian is in California on Palestine. Let's go there. Why wouldn't we? Brian, what would you like to say?
Yep. Hi, George. Big fan, first-time caller. I called to say that off of Palestine, there is a natural gas reserve that I think is the ultimate goal of the U.S.-Israel coalition. They want to steal it like they did in Iraq and other Arab countries. And I think if the Palestinians were allowed to sell their own resources, they could be as rich as any other Arab country and support themselves.
Well, of course, I'm familiar with that argument. It's partly true, but the gas reserves don't just belong to Palestine. A very significant part of the field belongs to the Israeli state. Still more belongs to Cyprus, Lebanon, Syria. They all share their share of the basin that contains all this gas. So the United States companies now will dominate the industry in all of these other countries. It will be US majors that do the drilling and will own the reserves in all of those countries, and including Gaza. The Palestine Authority would definitely sign an agreement with the Americans to allow them to exploit the gas off the coast of Gaza. The secondary point is that as a matter of law, these resources that lie off the coast of Gaza belong to the Palestinian people, and that is a matter of law recently adjudicated again by the International Court of Justice in The Hague. But you may say the law is an ass, doesn't matter a fig, you can break it at will, and that's true. But companies could be sued in multiple jurisdictions for illegally harvesting gas that belongs to the Palestinian people off the coast of Gaza. Governments which allowed it could be sued in their own jurisdictions. And these things would all be very troublesome indeed. So you're right in part, but I wouldn't hang your hat on that point, if you'll forgive me. Dennis Balgobin says Putin stood up for his country and kicked the Western carpetbaggers out of Russia and prevented them from stealing Russian natural resources. Is that why he's vilified? Yes, of course it is. Yeltsin was lauded as a kindly drunk when he was the president, because he was allowing the West to pick Russia's pockets. Trump has already declared the fact that he's teetotal. Putin is teetotal also. And a sober man like Putin will never allow the West to pick Russia's pockets again. Danny Delaney says Trump only wanted to stop the Ukraine war because Russia was taking too much mineral-rich land from BlackRock's clutches. And Torwind says when Trump said to Marco Rubio last night, well, if anything goes wrong, we can just blame you, I was laughing my ass off, because that's exactly what people were saying he was picked for. And Ramesses says truth doesn't matter to us Americans anymore. Just believe what you're told and don't ask questions. Let's go to Palestine, to Jerusalem, where Moshir is on the line. Moshir, welcome back. Moshir, are you there?
Good evening, George. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, all good. What would you like to say?
Good. I would like to put comment on the United States and Trump about Gaza. He refused the proposal of Arab summit yesterday. So I think, from my perspective, no United States, no Israel has right to refuse anything after what they have did in Gaza. So I think Arabs, they have to go inside Gaza and declare Gaza without taking permission from anyone. You know, this is the first one. Or Muslims nation, they have to go inside Gaza and declare Gaza and rebuild Gaza again.
Well, of course, these are highly desirable things you're reciting, but they don't take us any further forward, because the Arab leaders that proposed this plan are slaves of America and thereby slaves of Israel.
So that's what I'm saying. They don't have to take permission from anyone. They should not have even made that summit. They should have already now been inside Gaza and clear the dust and clear everything and start rebuilding without taking any permission. Or Muslim nation, they have to do this also. But let me just make another point, George. Trump, he said that he want to take Greenland and Canada as the first state and second state. So I said that before to you in your program. Why, Trump, I'm asking you, why you don't come to my country and take West Bank and Gaza and protect the people from the occupation and make these as the third state for the United States? And the last one, as Puerto Rico, it's away from you. Even Palestine can be also one of your states.
No, we don't have states, and the experience of British rule in Palestine was very far from a good one. So I strongly advise you not to ask His Majesty to come back to Palestine. But I know that people close to Donald Trump watch this show, and no doubt they'll report that a caller from Jerusalem, a Palestinian caller from Jerusalem, requested that he takes Gaza and the West Bank as the 53rd state of the Union. Thanks, Moshir. We've got to go to Florida, where Simon from Weaponized News, one of our great legends of the mother of all talk shows, wants to talk about last night's Trump speech. Go ahead, Simon.
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. Well, if I may slightly deflect, since that issue has been somewhat covered by your previous guest, we have big news from Ursula von der Leyen, who's proposing that the European Union collectively spend 800 billion euros over the next 4 years in her program called Rearm Europe. Her goal is for every country in Europe to increase their defense spending by 1.5 0.5% of gross domestic product, and then borrow an additional 150 billion euros from the European Investment Bank, possibly take some of it from the Green Fund, which obviously is very appropriate since the tanks will be painted green. And meanwhile, we have Friedrich Merz, who's now negotiating a possible delay to the start of the new parliament in order that with the outgoing members of the Social Party of Germany, led by the previous Chancellor Scholz, ram through an amendment to the German constitution, which in theory can't be done in the available time, in order that they can blow out their budget, disregard blowing out the budget, create two special funds, and spend 920 billion euros just in Germany, just on defense and infrastructure. I salute your campaign on, or rather against, conscription, and I would like to point out to all who are concerned about that conscription was passed in Britain at the second go-around in World War II in 1 day. When war was declared in September the 3rd, they jammed through conscription in the House of Commons and House of Lords, and it was signed by the King in less than 12 hours. It was originally for age 18 to 40. That was extended in 1942 to age 51 and extended to women, if they think that they're going to dodge out, for age 20 through 30. So if people think they can suddenly get on a plane to America, they may be sorely disappointed when we find the airports are all suddenly closed within that 12-hour window. So my final point would be just drawing people's attention to the fact that we're midway through this now comment period for the House of Lords International Agreements Committee. They had a secret meeting yesterday and are going to be holding more meetings on the 11th and 12th of March. Bear in mind that we have the European Union Council meeting tomorrow, where they'll be discussing von der Leyen's plan. And there's a suggestion that because they're concerned about Hungary vetoing it, they're going to remove the Hungarian voting rights under the argument of Russian interference and Hungarian rule of law issues that they've been complaining about for some years now. So in order to avoid the foreign affairs veto, they're literally going to disenfranchise not only possibly Hungary, but also Slovakia. So you'll be pleased to hear that the British establishment are completely tucking up the House of Lords inquiry. We have long-time Ukrainian supporter Stephen Doughty, who's taking a break from all of his LGBTQ activities in Wales to support the giving of billions of pounds and the sending of thousands of British troops to Ukraine, alongside a professor who lectures at King's College University on strategic communication. So you can be sure that he'll stay on message, but he's having to take a break from working for the British Ministry of Defence and GCHQ. So I'm sure he'll give us some really independent advice to the House of Lords. He's going to be joined by Hannah Hopker, who was described as a civic leader in Ukraine during the Maidan coup, and is also going to be giving us excellent expert independent advice, taking a break from leading the International Center for Ukrainian Victory. And then they'll finally be joined by Simon Smith, who was previously famous as the British ambassador to Ukraine during the Maidan coup and worked alongside Victoria Nuland. So we can be absolutely certain that that 100-year treaty will get the most appropriate scrutiny. And then people, if you're your more erudite members of the audience, if they're seeing these great machinations and these tectonic plates moving, as the Chinese have reiterated during their NPC and CPPCC big annual conferences that are currently underway in Beijing, where they've said that they want 5% growth for the next year, not like Britain is experiencing 0.1% growth. Then
0.1,
might like
don't forget the 0.1.
They might like to, they might, our audience, your audience, might like to look at the rhyme by Rudyard Kipling called The Three Sealers. And it's about the Americans and the Europeans trying to steal resources from the eastern coast of Russia at the turn of the previous century, and how they all ended up fighting amongst themselves when they ran around scared at what they thought was a Russian Coast Guard ship, but was actually a mirage in the mist. But they fired upon each other and ended up with nothing and killing each other.
What a wonderful story. I definitely will look that up, Simon. Thanks for that tremendous tour of the horizon there. So the polls closed. 33,725 people voted, and only 4% on Telegram, only 8% on X, only 6% on the YouTube community poll, and only 7% on the YouTube stream support conscription for Ukraine. 96, 92, 94, 93 are all against. Now, my other show, Have It Out with Galloway, is going great guns. Take a look at how you can be on it. Watch this. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Be on the studio wall. Participate in the debate about the greatest issues of our time. This is the place where we tackle the world's biggest problems and offer some of the world's best answers. You can have your say. Write to me at our website at haveitoutwithgalloway.com and join me here in the studio audience.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, let's take a call from California before Gayatri, because Frank in California disagrees with me on Piers Morgan. We must hear more. Frank, it's not Frank Morgan, is it? You're not his brother.
Hi, George. First of all, I'm sorry. I really love your show. I thank you for the opportunity to educate us. But he did call you a drunk uncle, and that I did not like that at all. But you got to be able to call a duck a duck. How are you going to convince people that Putin's not? You refuse to call Putin a dictator, yet you call Zelensky, a man defending his country from an invasion, a dictator, and then you even refuse to say that Putin invaded Russia. I mean, Ukraine. I'm sorry, that Putin invaded Ukraine. Call a duck a duck.
I always call a duck a duck. And as for being a drunk uncle, I've never tasted alcohol in my whole life, so I'm not sure how I could be a drunk uncle. You're a concerned troll. You wanted to thank me for all my education and so on, but actually you are a mouthpiece for Piers Morgan, so you're going to get full blast. Just be prepared. Piers Morgan, like an overgrown schoolboy, responded to my arguments about Zelensky, Ukraine, and the war by literally braying the word Putin, 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 Russia, 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 just like people like you do to Trump in the United States. Russia, 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 Putin, Putin, Putin does not an argument make. I have never said that Russia did not invade Ukraine. On the contrary, I have always said that they invaded Ukraine. I have never called it a special military operation. I have always characterized it as an invasion. Putin is not a dictator. Putin is an elected president. Zelensky is not an elected president. So I agree with your president, Donald Trump, when he called, not me, when the President of the United States called Zelensky a dictator, I agreed with him. Now, as you're in California, put that in your big fat reaper and smoke it. Gayatri has arrived in the studio with the social media news roundup. Gayatri, what's rattling?
Is Zelensky still up for a talk with President Putin?
Well, who knows? I mean, it literally changes by the hour because he's doing it all on social media. So you never actually get an official state
Definitive.
communication from the Ukrainian state that you can depend on.
It's pancaking, flipping
Tossing
around.
Speaking of tossers, there's a lot of them around.
Yes, exactly. So Ramsey Khoury says, I just came across a statement that surely applies to the warmonger leaders in the European and Middle Eastern conflicts. Here's freedom to him who would speak. Here's freedom to him who would write. For there's none ever feared, for the truth should be heard, than he whom the truth would indict.
Yeah, it's a good line.
Your fellow countryman.
Yeah, it's Robert Burns.
Robert Burns.
It's great stuff. The greatest gift that God would give us is to see ourselves as others see us. And more people, thanks to shows like this, are beginning to see how others see us.
So the poll was interesting. Do you support conscription for Ukraine?
Hardly anybody.
No, hardly anybody. But those, that small percentage that is supporting it, well, they should get ready and get shipped out.
Where's your tin hat?
The Ukrainiaks, as Caleb nicely puts it.
Yeah. If you look at that X vote, so 6,350 people voted on X. 8% of them said they support conscription for Ukraine. So it's a small percentage, but it's a big number. So 10% would have been 635. So let's call it more than 500 people on X support conscription for Ukraine. So your country needs you. Where's your tin hat? Get your bag, get your gun, and go. Why don't you? Gutless cowards.
Exactly. So SDF says, ambiguous questions in these times, George. Do you mean conscription of Brits to go to Ukraine, or just dragging Ukrainian people into vans while they're walking their little dog like little Zelensky is doing already?
Well, as you know, neither you nor me draw up these polls, and there is an ambiguity there, but it might actually be a deliberate ambiguity. I don't support the brutal conscription of Ukrainian youth. I say youth, they're about to reduce it to 14. There's a bill before the Rada now to reduce the conscription age in Ukraine to 14, and it's already 18 to 60. So it'll be 14 to 60. And you know the reason for that? There are millions, 9 millions of Ukrainians living, many of them living the life of Riley, outside of Ukraine, demonstrating for your son to go and fight in Ukraine while they are draft dodging in your country. Go figure.
On the back of that, I want to read Maggot Leap's comment. It says, yes, as a proud American, I think it's vitally important to the international rules-based order and freedom itself that we fight Russia to the last European.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of new isolationist feeling in the US that having been entangled in 2 European wars already in the 20th century, they should definitely avoid getting entangled in one now. I'm of the generation that says the problem with the Americans was that they were overpaid, oversexed, and over here. So I suggest that you all take your nylon stockings, or nowadays the soldiers would be wearing the nylon stockings, but in the past they were using them as currency in the bars and clubs. Take your nylons, take your fancy cigarettes, take your hats and take your guns and go back to the United States. I strongly recommend that, and I hoped that President Trump would do that last night, but unfortunately he did not.
No. Burnsy says, I'd sooner go to prison for 10 years than allow my children be conscripted to fight and die for Kit Starver and Angela, I'm working class Rayner. Because at least in prison you'll get meals 3 times a day, don't you?
And it'll be warm.
It will be warm.
It'll be a lot warmer than most poor households in the United Kingdom over this last winter, let me tell you that.
Do you think that could be an argument in this, that it will be the poor that have no choice but to go for financial reasons?
Because people like my son, I can afford to send him abroad, and he's got people abroad that will look after him, so I can do that. But tens of millions of British families have neither the money or the arrangements that they could make. So undoubtedly, they'll either go to the front or they will go to jail if they refuse. But the problem is there's no room in the jails. The jails are absolutely full. So guess what? Starmer would have to release all the criminals in order to put the conscientious objectors to his Ukraine war behind bars. Ha! Good luck with that, Keir. I'm almost tempted to say, go on, Keir, make my day.
What a circus. And circus it is really, because this conscript to fight is really a script to scare, isn't it? Your COVID 2.0 argument at the last MOATS.
Yeah.
So a former soldier writes in, Patrick Welch, it is insane to even suggest boots on the ground in Ukraine. All young men should beat it fast if Starmer wants to send you into the meat grinder of the WEF. I say this as a veteran who still has his marbles. Don't go. So yeah, and even if we wanted to go, Paul Brown says we cannot go to war with anyone. We cannot afford so. The engineering business of Birmingham and Sheffield, Manchester, they no longer exist. They have been replaced by warehouses to store goods imported from the Far East. We no longer make anything of any significance. We have to buy our weapon systems from the USA, who now control this country from the Bloomberg building in London.
And thanks to the greenery, wokery and quackery, we've of course destroyed all our coal mines, but we've also capped our North Sea oil development in the interests of greenery. So we're going to have a windmill-powered military-industrial complex in Britain? Ya bams.
Let's go to Norma.
Norma, another legend on the line. Norma in Bristol, always a pleasure to close the show with you, Norma. What would you like to say? Wasn't it your birthday yesterday, Norma?
Pardon?
Was it your birthday the other day?
Yes, it was yesterday. And
Yesterday.
I mean, it's a bit of a celebration, this call to you, because I was 87, George, and my granddaughter took me out for a cream tea, and I put some photos on Twitter, and I had some lovely replies. But what I really need to say, when you're old, I just think it's so important to keep in touch with what's going on. And, I mean, it's a crazy world. And you have to listen to alternatives and keep learning. That keeps your brain alive. Do you know what I mean?
Of course. You and my mother is 90 this year, in fact, in a couple of months. And she, like you, keeps up to date with everything that's happening and grabs any passing stranger to regale them with her political views and converts some of them also. It's a great role to play later in life, Norma, and you always remind me of my mother in that regard. So they took you out for a cream tea. Just tell our American audience what a cream tea is.
Yeah, it's not a cup of tea with cream in. It's strawberry jam, little scones, clotted cream, and a nice pot of tea. It's not a big tea, it's just very nice. And it was a smart restaurant with white tablecloths and beautifully served, you know. And my granddaughters, I put their photos on as well. They're very nice to me, so although my health isn't very good, and they help me to walk, I can't walk very well, but it was lovely, you know, really lovely.
God bless you, Norma, and all your family, and as we say in Scotland, lang may your lum reek. Look it up. Lang may your lum reek. Norma in Bristol, bringing the show to a close. There are many final thoughts that I would like to lay out before you because it seems to be a theme that I should address. Thinking that Donald Trump is better than Joe Biden does not mean that you love Donald Trump. It does not mean that you're glad Donald Trump's there rather than, say, Dr. Jill Stein or Caleb Maupin. That's not how politics works. everything is relative, and Donald Trump is, relatively speaking, much better than Joe Biden was or Kamala Harris would have been. Secondly, supporting Donald Trump on his efforts to bring about an end to the war in Ukraine does not mean that you support Donald Trump in his attitude to Gaza. It does not mean necessarily that you support his stance towards Denmark on Greenland or towards the Popinjay Trudeau in Canada. None of these things is conditional upon the other. I support Trump's efforts to bring about an end to the Ukraine war. That's it. I might support him on some other things. And he's actually been remarkably successful. Since we all laughed at him taking over the Panama Canal, he's taken over the Panama Canal. Today, BlackRock bought the two Hong Kong companies that were operating the ports on both sides of the Panama Canal. So BlackRock now owns the Panama Canal on behalf of the United States. I'm perfectly sure that one way or another, Trump will get Greenland off Denmark. He may or may not pay Denmark. He'll certainly pay the very small population of Eskimo people in Greenland, Inuit people in Greenland. He'll not have to pay them much. They're exceedingly poor people. They live really quite an ancient kind of life. And if he pays them a small amount of money each, it will cost the United States not very much. And then they will be in charge of whatever minerals lie under the soil of Greenland, whatever treasure may or may not lie off the shore of Greenland, and be quite a big, handsome American base, for sure. I'm sure one way or another he will achieve that. I don't think he'll take over Canada. I don't believe the next Prime Minister of Canada will be the governor of the 51st state, but frankly, I don't give a damn, my dear, one way or the other. Canada deserves to be taken over by the country that's been ordering them what to do for a very long time. So, although on behalf of my friends in Canada, I wish them the best, if Trump ends up taking it over, I really don't give a toss. I just want to make sure that my children and their children yet unborn can live in a world where the possibility may very well be that their lives and the lives of everything on the planet will be ended by a nuclear holocaust. That's the main thing for me. Maybe I'm just getting old. Well, it's been marvelous. Hope you agreed, and if you did, I'll see you on Sunday for the Sunday Mothership edition of the Mother of All Talk Shows. Thanks for watching. I lost my way there at the end.
It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Go get 'em, George.